Industry stalwart David Bottrill has been producing hit records since the mid-80s. We talked to him about his process producing and mixing progressive two-piece Crown Lands, breaking down their track White Buffalo.
For pre-production, we set up in a studio called Chalet up in Uxbridge in Ontario. I set them up as a band, kind of looking at each other with Kevin's mics to the side and Cody looking at Kevin, and they could really communicate well together. And then I was just sitting off to the side with headphones on, of course, because it gets very loud. And we worked through all the songs and we made sure that everything was arranged the way that I thought was best, and working with the band how they felt. In this particular song, there were some different time signatures that they had used, and I said, you know, you've got a great 7/4 time signature that you're working on now, and that's really exciting for a certain area. And then it went into a sort of 9/8 section, and then it's another thing that didn't really suit the song. And I felt that the song was much better served by remaining on the 7, going to the 4 on the choruses, and then coming back to other things. But really, what you do for me in pre-production is you try to make the song flow as well as it can and be the best song that it can be. There are a number of things that are really important in a studio, but first and foremost is the vibe and the energy in the place. Of course, you want to have a great console. Like, this is a fantastic old Neve console, really well maintained and refurbished from the 1970s. You want good signal path, you want good microphones, but you want to have a good vibe, you want to have a good energy in a studio. You essentially want to try to create a situation where the artist feels like they're going to make their best performance. So having the energy, if it takes setting up some wall hangings or bringing some candles into a session or whatever it is that's going to make the artist feel comfortable, feel at home, maybe a little bit on edge, but able to do their best performances. Getting a full sound from a two-piece band is a bit of a challenge, but I think the way that this particular duo play, they fill out a lot of space. So the drum kit is quite large, and Cody plays a lot of very melodic parts. So he has that sort of progressive style whereby he fills a lot of space himself. And then Kevin, not only does he play guitar, but at the same time he's playing Moog pedals and keyboards at different times. So he quite fills out the rest of the harmonic material for the music. Recording them, the way that I ended up doing it was more of a band track sort of thing to try to create the live feel a little bit, but I also used the recording studio for what it's really good at, which is being able to layer things and overdub things. So we didn't do too much, and certainly that whatever we recorded, they can reproduce live. But I do like to do things like doubling and adding parts a little bit here, a little ear candy here and there, so that the listener has more to listen to than just a two-piece. Their sounds are very big, so they are able to really fill out the space. And of course, when you've got a voice like Cody's to record, that makes it really exciting to listen to. I think that trying to record them as a live band is an exciting thing to do, and we definitely did a band track session where we recorded them both playing at the same time. But I do like to focus on the individual parts as well. So we did do the recording as a band, but I also overdubbed things on top and replaced things that I thought they could play a little bit better. So we really focused on getting the drums and the first initial guitar down first, and then we sort of built on top of that. So for miking up a drum kit, I use a fairly standard setup where I will mic both the tops and the bottoms of the shell drums. So there'll be a kick in, there'll be a kick out, there'll be a snare top and bottom, toms top and bottom too. And in this case, Cody had 4 toms, so we had four mics on top, 4 mics on the bottom. I use a collection of room microphones as well, some close and heavily compressed. So I will print that as a heavily compressed sort of crunchy mic, and then I'll have some room mics further out, plus all the cymbal mics as much as we need. Usually it's just 2 overhead and then a ride mic and a hi-hat mic. But I find that it's great to be able to capture all those things, but the essence of a great drum recording for me is really having a solid, well-maintained drum kit that's tuned very well with fresh heads. So, you know, getting all the microphones and great consoles and inputs is great to capture that sound, but the sound from the source has to be good to start with. The drum kit, again, maintained well and fresh heads, but also a good player who knows how to hit the drum and not only go onto the drum, but come off of the drum. So I think Cody, he's a really great player. He's studied for a long, long time, and he's got a great feel in his playing, and he's got a great accuracy in his playing. So if you look at his drum heads, where he hits on the drums is very consistent, and that makes for a really solid drum sound. So again, microphone's great. Standard systems, if you've got a great drummer, and I've done this before, you can set up just a couple of mics in the room, and if they're a really great drummer like a Manu Katché or a Danny Carey, you'll get a great drum sound. I like to record the underside of tom-toms as well as the tops. So I like to get a full sound, and I will often gate them a little bit so that they just get the initial sort of round, warm tone on it. So if I solo up the drums for you on it, you can hear what I'm talking about. So you can hear how the fullness of the toms, you don't just get the attack at the top, but you get the full sound from the whole ringing of the shells. So I use the under heads to get that sound. So when I'm building the sound of a band, especially when it's a two-piece, I want to try to fill out the sound as much as I can in the studio, because I think the studio is a place that's different from live. And though we want to try to capture a really good live energy, I still want to be able to use the studio for what it's good for, which is layering of sounds and building an atmosphere and a spirit on a track. So with this band particularly, we recorded them like a band, and we got the initial recordings with the two of them playing together. But then we replaced a few things that were not quite right. We redid the bass so that we could do both of the octaves. So let me play the octaves that we did on the bass. So he plays the Taurus pedals, and this is the lower octave. The upper octave. So that adds another set of frequencies up at the top. Together, it's not really easy to do that in a live situation because you need to do them separately to get that full effect. That's what the studio is really good for, is being able to add to that kind of a sound, fill it out without it feeling like it's a whole different thing. So and with the guitars, we did guitars in the way that he played them all together, but we would often double the guitars up. So we would have two different guitars playing the same arpeggiated parts, so you get that chorusing feel. Again, you can't do that live without putting in a pedal. I find that chorus pedals, although I like them, it works better for me when you actually have doubled part to play to get the natural chorusing of the instrument. So. And then with this particular band, they love to use Leslie pedals, or Leslie cabinet, a full real Leslie cabinet mic'd up. So I'll play that same thing again. We'll play the guitar, and then I'll just move it to the Leslie so that you can tell how it also fills out the sound. So you can hear that sound is made up of the full distorted heavy guitar, but also that Leslie sound, it just fills out the whole harmonic areas to make it this big full sound, plus it's doubled. So one of the really cool things about this band is how much ground Kevin covers in what he plays. So when he's playing his bass pedals, which are the Taurus pedals, he sometimes midis those up to a keyboard that plays what's an old Mellotron strings. The Mellotron was an instrument that was made many, many years ago with basically long pieces of tape that used to drag across a series of tape players that you would play with a keyboard. And the strings that they recorded for these things, as all the musicians will know, are sort of, let's just say, not the best players. So they were always kind of a little bit out of tune and a little bit too much vibrato. Anyway, it created a certain sound. So we can recreate these electronically now. And what Kevin does is when he's playing his bass parts with his foot, he's playing his guitar and he midis it up. And so I'll play what comes in the bridge. He plays this part. So I'll solo it up for you. So he's got that all set up on his keyboard and on his foot pedal, so he can play that, and it plays those chords for him. So it's a way in which they utilize just two people to fill out the sound of things. So you get more than just the two people playing together. You get all these extra sounds, and he covers that all live. For the most part, I tend to record the guitar effects with the guitar, particularly if they're pedals. Some of my most fun time in studios is getting down on the floor and tweaking knobs and twisting the pedals until we come up with something new and interesting. But I think the sound is very important for the artist when they're playing to respond to that sound. And to try to do it dry and put it on later, for me, is always kind of counterproductive, because the artist doesn't tend to play as well when they're just doing a sound that's uninspiring. So I want to inspire the artist with the sound. So I keep it on, and we will always record that. If I'm unsure about it, I'll maybe record it on different tracks, but I'll always record it. Case in point, again, I'll play the guitars. Those were all the effects that are on the guitars, except for maybe a little extra delay, were all recorded at the time. So here's that chorus guitar again, and I'll play it for you. So that's just the guitar. Like I said, there's the Leslie. And then later on, there's some extra guitars too that come in. So that solo guitar, you can see when I shut it off, the effects go away, because they're all recorded on the track, and all those delays, because he wanted to play with that sound and vibe with that. So he's inspired by that sound. Let's just record it. I have my own microphone that I use for recording vocals for the most part, and Cody seemed to really work well with it. It's an old Neumann M7 capsule, like his in the 47, but it's the old amplifier from the pre-war Neumann company. So it's a very old, dear microphone to me, and I've had it since my days of working with Peter Gabriel. So I use that for most vocalists. It seems to work for the most part. Sometimes we will use another, and I've just got a new Townsend Sphere mic, so I'm excited to really try different versions of that. But that's my M7 is my go-to microphone. When I record things, I generally use a little bit of equalization and compression. I don't overdo it unless the sound is dependent upon that. Sometimes with a singer, they really work the microphone well, and they need compression to enhance what they're doing. So I will add some compression and equalization there. On drums, I like things to pump, so I will get the overhead microphones and the room microphones through compressors, but I will generally do it somewhat conservatively so that I can add more to it when I'm in the mix situation. So for recording vocals and editing vocals, I have a philosophy about editing too much and cleaning things up too much. I think that each individual singer has a real character to their voice, and part of that character is how they go out of tune in little areas, how they work around what I think is the depth of the note. So sometimes a singer will come in a little bit sharp at the top and maybe bend something down that's a little bit flat. Unless it's an uncomfortable flatness or an uncomfortable sharpness, I tend to leave those things, because that's kind of the humanity of the way a singer sings. So I don't like things that are heavily tuned. Again, like with drum editing and with timing editing, I use the tuning of vocals to just correct things that are egregiously out, not to make everything perfectly in tune, because again, I think that takes away some of the humanity. And even when a singer sings, they're often grunting a little bit, or they're breathing hard. I find that if you take too much of that out, again, you lose a little bit of the humanity. So I want to play you something that's on this track right at the beginning of this song, and it's where he kind of clears his throat a little bit after one of the lines, or does a little bit of a grunt. You don't really hear those in the music per se, but you feel them, and that brings a sort of humanity to life in a vocal performance. So here's how that goes.
Big wave will come and wash away the ancient world. A burning soul.
So you hear that little there. Again, I could have edited that out. We're in the world where digital technology allows you to do those things. But I leave some of those things in just so that when a listener is listening to it, maybe 5 or 6 times down the line, they might not necessarily hear it, but they'll feel it. They'll hear the humanity in the vocal performance. So when I'm mixing a song and I've got some vocal effects, I like to have a lot of delays. I like to fill out the sound of the voice, depending on the song, of course, and whether it suits the song. But I'm a real sucker for a backwards reverb, and it's so nice that the plugins of today have a button on them to actually go, okay, you want this reverb to go backwards? Hit that button, and it sends it all backwards. We used to spend so many hours flipping the tape over, making sure you were recording on the right track, because of course it was upside down. So if you recorded on the wrong one, you might erase something that you weren't intending to erase. And then you'd send the vocal through a reverb, print that, flip the tape back over, and you'd have a backwards reverb or a backwards piano, like in that Bohemian Rhapsody song. So, all these things are so much fun to do and used to take a long time. Now it's kind of the press of a button, but I still love the sound of it. So here it is coming in solo.
Like a white buffalo.
And I'll play that in the track too. It just gives a little bit of a rise so that you can feel something is really exciting is coming. So. So that's a technique. It's been used for years and years, but it just adds that little rise into the chorus of the song so you feel something exciting is going to happen. This band Crowned Lands, they're really talented musicians, so there really wasn't a lot of editing that was necessary. What I use editing for is when somebody's made a great performance of a whole thing and then this one little bit out, I'll move that or tightens things up a little bit, but I want to keep the essence of the human recording that they've done. So I will edit things a little bit to maybe tighten them up in places where they've gone out a little bit, but I want to keep the energy of what they've played, and I don't want to just put things right onto the grid. So yes, there's a little bit of editing, but nothing really dramatic. For me, I use a second mix phase when I'm making a record, primarily because I work in a certain way where I have templates, and I am able to mix in the way that I like to mix, and it takes tearing the session down and rebuilding it up in a mix situation. I like that separation of from the performance era to the sort of the mixing era, which is kind of my performance. And what I do is I will take the source material and the essence and the vibe of it, and then mix it through what is essentially my filter and what I think is best. And I work with the bands that I'm working with as well, so that they can understand where I'm coming from and how my vision is for the music. I always want to coordinate that with the band, but I have a certain thing in my head when I'm producing a band of how it's going to sound. That takes me separating it out from that recording side to the mixing side. I mix entirely in the box. I've found that I made the switch about 7 or 8 years ago. I found that clients like to be highly detailed, as I like to be highly detailed. And if I want to come back to a mix later and redo something a little bit, but I want to keep the essence of what it is, I find that in the box, it's a much easier thing to do. Plus, when I'm working with multiple clients at one time, which I often do, I can switch back and forth between mixes of different clients really, really quickly and be able to kind of work on a mix of somebody, send it off to them, switch over to somebody else, mix that, or get working on that mix. It's for my workflow so much quicker to work in the box than it would be to reset up a console manually every time. So I'm an endorsee of the UAD, Universal Audio company, and I use a lot of their plugins for most of my mixing. On the mix bus, I use the Shadow Hills mastering compressor. I use the BX mastering equalizer on the top, just to add a little bit of air at the very top end. And as the final stage, I'll use the McDSP, which I also endorse, the M8000 multiband limiter for the final stage of just taking the edges off little frequencies. I don't do any of these things very dramatically. The mix doesn't tend to fall apart if I don't use those things, but I do like to just create the last little bit of shine on it at the end. So I'll keep it running here. But I want to point out too that when I record bands, you can tell that the parts are the same from verse to verse and from chorus to chorus, but I never really want to just copy and paste parts back and forth. I really want to feel like that, even though they're playing exactly the same thing, I want it to feel a little different. So when we record the verse part, and the second verse, we record it again. Because I feel like a musician should be able to play the song at least all the way through. Same with the choruses. I know that some people and some producers like to do it and have it exactly the same each time, and that gets you a certain result. But for me, I love the humanity of a band playing each part separately and each part individually, so that even though that they're exactly the same, there are still little intricacies that are slightly different, and it gives you the feeling that it's a new part and a new performance.
That's all for now. If you like what you saw, please be sure to like and share it, and subscribe and click the bell icon so you know when we upload new content to our YouTube. Also find us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Thanks for watching.